Hi, I'm Jahan Colberth, Director of Federal Relations at the Council for Higher Education Accreditation. CHEA's upcoming annual conference themed Quality Assurance Matters will begin on January 29th and run through February 1st in Washington, D.C. We are excited to present a series of 3 pre-conference videos. These pre-conference videos bring together esteemed thought leaders in higher education to delve into compelling and timely topics. So welcome to our first pre-conference video titled Artificial Intelligence. Are you concerned? This video features Dr. Peggy Valentine and Dr. Bradley Malin from Vanderbilt University. With that said, Dr. Valentine, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, and welcome to a great discussion on artificial intelligence. My name is Peggy Valentine, and I serve as Vice President for Allied Health Education here at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. And I'm joined today with Dr. Brad Malin, who is the Associate Professor of Biomedical Informatics, Biostatistics, and Computer Science, as well as Vice President for Research Affairs in the Department of Biomedical Informatics here at VUMC. He is a renowned researcher in the field of artificial intelligence and has funded grants from the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, and Patient-Centered Outcomes Research. Dr. Malin, welcome.
Thank you.
I want to admit up front to those who are viewing this that, like many of my colleagues in the education world, I'm a novice when it comes to AI. And out of curiosity, Dr. Malin, what is AI and where did it come from? And how did it get started and for what purpose?
It's a great question. Well, great series of questions. So artificial intelligence has a relatively longer history than probably most people realize. AI goes back around 80 years. It started mostly in the neuroscience community, and they were really trying to figure out how do humans reason. And so it was a representation or a way to represent the way that human thought proceeded, so that if you could get a better understanding of how humans process things, then you might be able to get a model of it, and therefore when things were not necessarily functioning correctly in terms of somebody was deviating from expectations in terms of how to interact, you'd be able to figure out, okay, well, we understand how the human mind works, and so therefore we'd be able to help address any concerns. It's kind of surprising in that respect. It didn't start in computer science, and computer science wasn't really, it was really just pure mathematics at the time. So it moved from this basis of neuroscience into a little bit of a philosophical endeavor, because people were interested in, well, could we get machines that also reason like humans? It's not just about representation of human capability and human thought, but could we get a machine to make decisions or provide recommendations and even explore the world for itself? And so how would that look? What types of structures or ways would be necessary to try to get a machine to do that type of representational learning? So this really started to move forward as a field in probably the 50s and 60s. And that's when you see machines that are being taught to play games. Things like chess or Go or simpler things as checkers. And it's really quite intriguing, because the notion of gameplay is how do you learn rules? How do you explain rules? How do you represent the way in which the world functions? You don't necessarily want to take a piece on a board and just move it over to someplace that's not allowed to be and claim checkmate, right? So you need to kind of have a way of having a machine recognize what are the ground rules and how to reason within that space. So the reason why this gets a bit philosophical is that people started asking questions about, well, what's the role of artificial intelligence? Is it just to represent human thought, or is it to try and get a machine to reason and possibly do things in a manner that humans would not do? And so it's you see a bit of a schism in the field in terms of one direction. It's all about this philosophical perspective on trying to get reasoning machines, And then the other direction is we try to get machines to do the things that humans can do, no matter how complex the task. So, so this is intriguing in that you then see artificial intelligence start to split again, in that on one side they're trying to figure out how do you get a computer to predict, just make a recommendation for, let's say you have a patient who's going to come into a hospital and they're going to present with certain symptoms and you need to make a recommendation on admit or no admit. And this is the predictive aspect of artificial intelligence. So you know exactly what you're asking the AI to do. Around the 1970s, 80s, there started to be this perspective that maybe you could get computers to be a little bit more creative and more generative with respect to what they're doing. And this is the notion that you can ask a computer a question and it would provide you with an answer. It could be narrative in its nature, and there was this question of could you tell the difference between what a computer would do and what a human would do, right? And this became known as the Turing test. So it's intriguing in this regard that AI kind of manifests in many different perspectives, and people try to use it for many different things. A little bit more on the history here. It really wasn't until maybe about 10 years ago or so when the computational complexity was capable of being represented in a manner that we could build technologies that would support interactive AI. And that's because like we kind of knew how we wanted AI to function almost 50 years ago, and all of the mechanisms were designed, but we just didn't have the computational power to make it work quite to the extent that we do today.
So what made it, how were we able to speed things up, so to speak, in terms of being able to have the computational capacity that we have today?
Yeah, good question. So there were a series of major advancements in information technology that really propelled this forward. Number one was the internet.
Yeah.
Before the internet, the information that we had today was not as robustly digitized. And in order to help a machine to learn, at least in the context of machine learning, and I'll come back to this in a second, but when you want a machine to learn, you need to be able to provide it information in a relatively readable fashion, right? Like a human can sit there and read a book, like we know how to do it, but a computer, unless you had the optics at the time, like it just couldn't read. So you had to get it into a format that it could actually make sense of. So the internet and digitization really changed things. The second one was really, I guess you could say, Moore's law hit a threshold where, so basically you had computational power that we did not have even at the time. Well, let me rephrase that. I think everybody's familiar with the concept that computational power is growing at an astronomical pace.
Absolutely.
And it's gone on this way. Digital processing has gone this way since basically silicon chips were created.
Yeah.
And so like we thought that we would hit a wall, and instead it just exploded. And like we hit like parallel processing, and then we had going from like regular computational to graphical processing units. Basically, you get supercomputing on a chip. And supercomputing on a chip didn't really happen until we started to see things like the most recent instantiation of like the MacBook, or when the iPhone came out. You had like supercomputing power in the palm of your hand. Now imagine doing this like all over the entire world and hooking together all that computational power. That's really like the second major innovation that we had. And then the third one is that, and this is a little geeky, but it's the fact that programming became a lot easier. So computer programming used to be, it was very clunky, and it took a lot of time to learn how to program. We're now getting to the point where a lot of computer program is almost conversational in nature. And so anybody can come in and start getting a little program written. And then starting, like, I'll be honest, last year, you got to the point where with technologies like ChatGPT and other types of Copilot technologies, it will write the code for you. And
Yeah,
so
that's
people like can
amazing.
just, yeah, it's insane. Like it's
Yeah,
unlike anything that anybody was ever expecting. So you've got the data, you've got the processing power, and now you've got people who are interested in doing things that can do really creative things that they couldn't have done
yeah.
otherwise.
And for those who are within my circle of educators, seen firsthand how all these changes are affecting health sciences and especially in healthcare. And there's so much information that students need to learn in a short period of time. And I was just wondering, can AI help students learn faster? And with all the information they have to know, because there's so many changes we see in healthcare today. And you mentioned chatbots or Chat GPT. So will all of that help students learn masses of information faster, in your opinion?
I think the jury's out. We we
Yeah.
don't have the answer. I think you can take a step back though and ask the question slightly differently, which is, does technology make people learn faster or support learning at a faster rate? And the answer is for many people, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Not always for all people, but in many situations, technology makes it easier to process information, get access to information, look at it in different ways. I think the challenge that we're going to run into with some of the AI technologies like chatbots is is the individual, is the student going to be learning, or are they going to be relying upon the chatbot
Mm,
to generate things for them to make it seem like they've learned?
right.
Chatbots as a proctor, for instance, like a conversational agent where it's determining if you're providing it with the correct answer and it tries to coach you along,
Yeah.
that will definitely facilitate learning. If you have somebody come back to a student and say, write me an essay on XYZ, and you go directly to the chatbot and it writes the essay for you, and then you turn it in on claim that you're the one that did the work,
Yeah.
then it might not facilitate learning so much.
Yeah. That's a good point. And also educators are also concerned, as you were saying, that are the students really learning, or are they just sort of relying on technology or artificial intelligence to help them to pass the course? And as educators who are producing health professionals, there's concern for, are these students competent? Once they graduate, will they deliver competent health care? And there was an article published in the Nursing Management Journal just a few years ago, I think in 2019, about the changing role for nursing, for example, and the impact that it will have on healthcare delivery. And you know a lot more about this than I do, but in terms of the use of robots, even now, where robots are in patients' homes or people's homes to monitor their ability to walk and to have they fallen or do they need help. And so we see that there are some changes in healthcare, and there are probably a lot of things that are being developed now that we don't know about. And I wonder, can you talk about the use of robots or artificial intelligence and how and the students' performance and clinically to render safe and competent healthcare? Do you have any concerns about that? And the use of technology in terms of robots in delivering patient care?
Yes and no. So there's a question about the design of technology. So this is
Yeah.
something that I think a lot of people, a lot at least computer scientists neglect. A lot of computer scientists get very excited about writing that new piece of technology, but the ergonomics of it and the human factors component sometimes gets lost along the way. Um, that's one of the most challenging things associated with getting AI into society and embedded into application domains. We should make a distinction, though, between the notion of something that's purely computational, like a chatbot, versus having a mobile robot that
Hmm.
might be within somebody's home. They have their own issues associated with them. So, for instance, this will be fun. So there's this notion of what should a robot look like in order
Hmm.
for a human to interact with it. And so there's been all this research in this concept called the uncanny valley, where if you have a robot, if you had something that looked exactly like a human, no problem. Everybody would be like, oh, this is interesting. I can't tell the difference between you and me. I like interacting with you. If you have something that looks like your old school robot from the 1950s and 60s, and it's just like moves like this, everybody's like, yeah, totally fine. I can interact with this. As soon as you start getting things that start looking like humans, acting like humans, but they're not quite humans, people start going, I'm not comfortable with this. And you can imagine that in the context of home care, that can cause a problem. So if somebody doesn't feel comfortable interacting with the machine that's there to assist them, they may act evasively. They may do things that are just counter to what the designers of the technology had anticipated using it for. So no matter how great it reasons, no matter how great you think it's going to interact, you have to take into account how are humans going to interact with it. What is the cultural component that you're bringing this machine into? There's going to be very different experiences of having it interact with children versus having it interact with adults versus caretakers versus people who are just coming in and potentially showing up at their house and they don't necessarily want to interact with the robot. We can have a long talk about the robotic component. To take a step back, this question about so what does it go? Well, I'm going to take it in this direction. so there's this perspective that when somebody is going to use this technology in the context of care, let's say you have a copilot like a chatbot. So this it's really just something that it's a support tool for an individual who's practicing medicine or providing care. There's an expectation that if you take a human and then you add on a machine, you're going to get something more than the sum of the parts, or you're at least going to get the sum of the parts. So what we've been seeing is that when care is not taken, when the technology is designed independently of how humans will interact with it, what you end up seeing is that the effectiveness of the technology and the human is actually worse than either of them independently. And this is not expected to happen. But and it's not because it's really just an artifact of the technology design. If the human's mental model is different than the way that the machine is representing the problem, the human may look at the machine, what the machine is recommending, and goes, "Oh, that's not how I reason about it. No. I'm about to discharge this patient, and you're making a recommendation that says they're at risk for readmission within the next 7 days because of X and Y and Z." And I'm looking at the patient, and that's not a problem. X and Y and Z are definitely not a problem, according to me. And so therefore, I'm not going to trust you, not just in this situation, but in other situations. And so that is a major challenge. The second aspect of it is that a lot of the AI reasoning tools that are starting to come into the market now are extremely complex in their modeling. And what I mean by that is that because they're so complex, it's difficult for the machine to provide an explanation to the human about how it's reasoning or the recommendations it's making. At which point the human, again, whether it's a physician or a care or some type of a general health practitioner, they tend to get cagey about interacting with the technology at this point, because if it seems like it's giving you correct answers now, but you can't understand why it's giving you the correct answer or a good recommendation, then you don't know what's going to happen in situations in which there might be more uncertainty. So you just don't want to have that interaction. Moreover, a lot of hospital administrators or healthcare administrators are concerned about liability issues with the technology at
Right.
that point. Because if you can't understand its reasoning and what it's doing, it might seem like it's doing perfectly fine today, and then it has some weird, egregious misrepresentation of the
Mm-hmm.
world, and then tomorrow it makes recommendations that kills 100 patients.
Wow.
And at which point, I think the saying always is, humans can mess up. It takes a computer to really mess things
Yeah.
up on a large scale.
That tells me that the students need some critical thinking skills. You can't always believe what a machine is recommending because it may be totally, as you say, it may be detrimental to the patient's health care. And
Yep.
so I think that when you came to talk to our group a couple of months ago, you talked about sometimes there may be a tendency to pull information from the internet that's not correct, because there's all kinds of information out there. And so what you're relying on, it may be detrimental in healthcare. When can you, and I think earlier you talked about predictive versus analytical AI. And so I wonder, can you sort of talk about that within the context of medical errors and not using good judgment, on
Yeah.
the student's part?
Sure. So the generative component of AI, which is what a lot of people are excited about right now, um, and there's the most uncertainty around, but it's the most fun to interact with, and it's actually has the potential to be the most useful. I mean, let me take a step back. We've seen generative AI demonstrate some really amazing capabilities. So there was this study that was done at UCSD where they demonstrated that chatbot could create notes that were for a patient that would appear more empathetic to the
Mm-hmm.
patient than the doctor themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're concerned about, for instance, when you're concerned about like doctors or nurses who are going to burn out
Mm-hmm.
because of all the increased documentation and time it takes to do digitization, digital interaction, telehealth, there's a potential that turning over the reins towards generating documentation or having some interactions through the automated technology, if it's capable of providing patients the support that they need and they get a better experience out of it, then why not have it interact with the patients in that situation? Now, where things can be a little frustrating is that you don't necessarily want things to act entirely autonomously without an understanding for how it's interacting with the rest of the world, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
you don't want a patient to come back and say, I was interacting with this technology and it just told me something completely crazy. Um, and that's a concern because the notion of the generative AI is that it is an unbounded world that it can draw upon for
Mm-hmm.
interactions. So, where the healthcare community has demonstrated or has illustrated that there's some concerns, there's this great study that was done by Siru Liu at Vanderbilt earlier this year on looking at the potential for chatbots for clinical decision support, where they were asking ChatGPT, here's a patient of a certain kind, here's the meds that they're on, here's their medical history, what should I do for them next?
Mm-hmm.
Very open-ended question. A lot of the answers that came back made sense to the
Mm-hmm.
physicians that were evaluating it. And then they had a couple that came back where it wasn't just, I disagree with you, it was, I don't even know what you're talking about. And the chatbot came back and said, I think they should take this medication. And there was no such medication.
Wow.
It just doesn't exist.
Wow.
And so it just invented a medication because chatbots are meant to try to mimic human behavior. And it was like, I'm going to just make up an idea. That's not so bad. I mean, that's bad, but
That is bad.
well, it's like you then go to the pharmacist, right? And you're like, I need to order this drug. I've been told to order the drug. Pharmacist goes,
Right.
you're crazy. That doesn't exist, right? Where things got really weird is there were in that study they demonstrated that not only would the chatbot bring forward a recommendation for care, and it was a real drug at this point for a real clinical phenomenon. they were like, so then the chatbot said, and here's the reference, the peer-reviewed reference to support that recommendation. That peer-reviewed reference didn't exist.
Wow.
It just invented a paper that it seemed like it would be something that might be published in the Journal of the American Medical Association.
That's
And
amazing. Where would they get that from?
it right? It was like one of those times that you just go, "Oh, this is crazy." But why it's so crazy is that 99% of the time, it doesn't do things like this.
Okay.
And so where people are concerned and where they're really concerned with students is that, so if you are comfortable with the technology and you're like, man, this technology is fantastic. It's giving me everything that I need. And then a very small fraction of the time, it's like, I lied. It's like, but you're so comfortable with the technology at that point that you don't even begin
Yeah,
to
that's
question
pretty
it.
scary.
Yeah, it's kind of like trying to find the needle in the haystack. Now,
Yeah.
is that a tolerable effect of
Yeah.
these technologies? Somebody said to me recently, it's a computer scientist said to me recently, they said, we have a certain number of patients who die every year due to just general medical errors.
Right.
If the computer can help us reduce the number of medical errors that we have, do we worry that it may be providing some wrong recommendations, some hallucinated recommendations,
Mm-hmm.
when most of the time it's making healthcare safer?
Yeah.
I have no answer to that question.
Right.
I,
So we'll learn with time.
I think it's a really interesting situation because students are going to migrate towards new technologies that
Mm-hmm.
are going to make their life easier. If you were to go to somebody in the 1990s, early 1990s, and well, I guess mid 1990s, just as the internet was starting to come online, and
Mm-hmm.
you were to tell a student, sorry, you can't go look up this information online, even if somebody like has posted like this great analysis of
Yeah.
this great piece of literature. Sorry, that's just not available to you. You need to think this up on your own. It would be like,
Mm-hmm.
but it's there. I can go
It's
talk to
all
somebody that I
available.
wouldn't have been able to talk to otherwise, and they've documented
Yeah.
all this for me. You shouldn't cut off your nose to spite your face, but you
Right.
should be trying to figure out what are the ground rules. And I think that where things are slowly heading, maybe a little faster than I expected, is that there's going to be some degree of regulation around these
Mm-hmm.
technologies as they come out. Not
Right.
around how students can use it, but about
Yeah.
what these technologies are going to do in the real world, in
Right.
practice. That I think is that's coming.
I want to move now to talk a little bit about accessibility. I spent a big chunk of my career working at historically black colleges and universities, and I'm always asking about communities that have limited access to information, technology, and all these new advances that we're talking about. And when can you talk a little bit about AI as relates to accessibility? Do you see AI as something bringing us closer together, or creating more separation? And do you have any recommendations in terms of accessibility to all the advances that we're seeing in healthcare?
I think it's been recognized that so there's two parts to the accessibility issue. Uh, Part one is just, do we think that everybody who's interacting with the technology understands how to interact with it and has the same opportunities to interact with it? Um, I think that's a similar problem to the digital divide.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think, so I don't think that's specific to artificial intelligence. I think that's a more general problem about
Mm-hmm.
digital access and digital literacy. Where I think there's going to be a potential concern is that a lot of these technologies, the data that's being used to feed into them to support them isn't necessarily representative of the populations
Yeah.
that it's going to be used to serve. And so this creates a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
This is what we refer to typically as the algorithmic fairness
Mm-hmm.
problem. It will get better over time. But what has to happen first is that the technologies need to be appraised for their ability to make recommendations or make predictions that are equally efficacious across different subpopulations. And so this is going to be where there needs to be questions around. So how do you define those populations? Do you define it by race? Do you define it by geographic locale? Do you define it by age? Pick your favorite factor that we try to use to segment the population. And you're probably going to need to do an investigation that looks at disparities in that respect. I think the harder question, which I do not know the answer to, I'm a professor. I can sometimes pretend like I know the answer to things when I probably shouldn't. But so in this situation, one that I definitely do not know the answer to is what happens when the technology is brought forward and it appears to be really good at making predictions or recommendations for one group of people, and then it's not for another.
Right.
Do you just turn the technology off? Do you say this is a really tricky thing, right? It's kind of like saying, I've got a drug that I want to bring out into the market. It works really great for one class of people, doesn't work great for another class of people. Do you then pull the drug off the market? So what type of investments need to be made in order to make systems more fair? I think that's a policy-related question that the community is going to have to wrestle with.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And what as you were talking earlier, I was thinking about, we know that a lot of computers are hacked these days, and I'm just wondering, with artificial intelligence, can you get some crazy person to go in there and hack and give all the wrong information to put things at greater risk? That's always in the back of my mind.
I worry that what will happen is people will do what's called poisoning to the artificial intelligence, where the information, I think there's privacy concerns. I think that there's all sorts of concerns around just the reliability of the data. What I'm worried about is people actively subverting the system, and if they try to, they may flood the system with information that is just completely wrong, to the point where they make the technology unreliable. There need to be a battery of tests for quality that are constantly being applied to these technologies. And partly it's because these technologies just continue to learn over time. And they're subject to, so if somebody poisoned the system, they can force the technology in a certain direction. But it can also happen naturally, where the population just shifts, or the practice of care shifts, such that the assumptions of what these technologies are doing or making recommendations for no longer hold true. This is what's now being referred to as algorithmic vigilance, and I think that is it's very early stages, and I think partially it's because these technologies have not made it into healthcare quite to the extent that they're going to, and probably about, I would have originally said 5 to 10 years, and now I'm saying 6 months to 9 months. But those quality control measures are going to have to be set in place.
One of the other hats that I wear involves my service to CHEA on the Committee of Recognition. We look at the accreditation process to ensure that this quality of education happening at the various accrediting agencies that promote public trust. And what concerns accrediting agencies potentially could be AI and student preparation, and how might accrediting agencies determine if a student has using AI, and does it help to their performance? Do they use AI to assist in writing papers, taking certification exams, or using robots to perform certain functions? And how do we know that with the AI, the students have the basic knowledge that they need? And how do we know, when accrediting agencies are looking at schools, that the curriculum is being taught in a way that promotes quality of education? And I know that we're still very early on in the phase of this in terms of education. I just wonder if you have any thoughts about accrediting agencies, and what position that should we look at this time, if AI should be part of the curriculum, or do we want to put it in part of the curriculum later? We know that students are already accessing AI. Just wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
When you have something that has been this impactful this quickly, I think the curriculum has to change. Now, the question is, what do you teach and how do you adjudicate it? I don't think that the answer to that is completely known yet.
Yeah.
I will say that what we think is reliable now may not be so in the future. Let me give an example of where I'm going with this. So a couple months ago, there was a demonstration that you could get a large language model or chatbot to pass the USMLE. This was fascinating, right? There were similar demonstrations that showed the technology could pass the bar exam. And so that was in like March of 2023. You fast forward to June of 2023, they had the technology retake the examinations, and it didn't perform as well. As these technologies are advancing, they have many different things that they're trying to support simultaneously. And so as you tune them to become capable of doing this new thing, you run into this entanglement problem where as you're trying to like make that better, that may end up influencing the technology's ability to support something else. And so its capability goes down in that functionality. It's kind of like you can't satisfy all objectives simultaneously. So the reason why I bring that up is that it's a cautionary tale about having just general reliance upon the technology. So there's going to have to be education around, how do you check your references? How do you approve of something that gives appropriate attribution? This is what the technology brought forward. This is what I reviewed. This is how I signed off on it. It's kind of not, in many respects, it's not that much different. Well, it's different, but not. The analogy I think still works of having somebody go to Wikipedia and say the answer's there. I'm going to pull the answer, but you really need to check the references of where that answer came from, right? So I think it's another tool. I think the funny thing is that if you ask ChatGPT or Bard, but if you ask Chat, what do you think should happen in this situation? As I posed to it a couple months ago, it said, "Oh, I think that you should put students in a room without access to the internet and test them there." And that's interesting, but that really only just tells you what's their basic knowledge. But when people start functioning out in the world, what they think is their knowledge or what they have as a basis of knowledge, if they're interacting with the technology is going to change their behavior. It's going to change the way that they think. It's going to change whether or not they have faith in their own knowledge base. So you have to adjudicate them in the context of how do they interact with that technology. But there has to be transparency with respect to what they're doing. That's, I think, is going to be the key.
I mean, we certainly are living in a very exciting time in the world. And, we don't know what tomorrow will hold. We don't know how education is going to be changed, how healthcare will be changed, because there's so many changes that are taking place so rapidly. And this conversation has been one that's been very interesting, very intriguing. And I just wonder, before we close out, if you have any closing comments that you'd like to make and to share from your experience and recommendations for educators or accrediting agencies before we close out.
Sure. So number one is just because the technology is found to be useful at location A does not mean that the technology is going to be useful at location B. There is always going to have to be some type of a proof of concept. If you just blindly adopt the technology, I worry that that's a recipe for, I don't think I'm being hyperbolic. It's disaster. Things could really go wrong. I think secondly, there needs to be education around just continual education around the ethics of the use of technology. I think everybody would say that plagiarism without attribution is a bad thing. If you're taking what a technology has presented to you and just representing it as your own, that would be, in my opinion, that would be problematic. So there's principles that you could lean upon around that come out of the general ethics community, like like beneficence, non-maleficence. These principles, they should be embedded in any type of an educational setting and an evaluation setting, and so that should be relied upon.
I think that's wonderful. And I just want to say, Dr. Mallon, that this has been a wonderful conversation. And I want to tell those who are watching this that Dr. Mallon is a wealth of information. And for those who may have further questions or want to learn more about AI, what recommendations would you offer? Where can they go to get more information on this?
Wikipedia. No. There are a bunch of organizations that are spinning up that I think can help support people who are interested in this space. One is a program called CHEA, the Coalition for Health AI. This is a consortium of academic medical centers that are looking at what is it going to take for artificial intelligence to be brought forward into healthcare. There's also within your own specialty areas, I would look for committees that have been spun up that are supporting AI. So we've seen this happen in oncology, we've seen it happen in audiology. There's a new artificial intelligence group in anesthesiology. So all the professional societies are starting to put together documentation. You can run to the internet to try to figure out what you need. But in those situations, you're probably going to want to focus more on what the professional societies are bringing to the table.
Well, I just want to say thank you again for participating in this panel, and it's been a great discussion. And I look forward to the outcomes, what comes next.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Valentine and Dr. Malin, for your excellent and powerful look at artificial intelligence. AI is going to continue to evolve and to accelerate. However, in using AI, is the student learning or just looking up information? How do we measure student learning versus students referencing other materials? These are questions for accreditation. Tune in next week as we discuss DEI and religious ideologies, conflict or companion. I'm Jahan Colberth. We'll see you next week.